and just give it, it's just loading, connecting to YouTube right now. Okay, I'm going to start letting people in. We are good to go.
All right. Well, I'm going to say welcome to folks, but also vamp a little bit because I never am quite sure when the recording's actually starting.
Right.
So now I will say, hey, welcome everybody to this edition of Wellsness Wednesday and also WPA Wednesday. We put artists to work. So we're joined tonight. I'm very excited for the artists that are joining us tonight. And this is a conversation that's both about something that is happening next week. We're going into rehearsal for a play. But these, the designers were actually, this is an early part of the process for the next show at the Wells, which is a rep of Ken Ludwig's Dear Jack, Dear Louise. And the fantastic Hold These Truths, and then we're doing a single team for both of those shows. So joining me tonight, Seema Sueko, the director of both of these shows, Alan Maroka, who is the scenic designer, and Lynn Hartman, the lighting designer. Jeannie Sakata, the writer for Hold These Truths. We're really excited to have both of these shows in rep. And so we have both a reading coming up. So we'll have an opportunity, Seema, for you to get into rehearsal for some time with the actors who will then come back in October. And we get to start having conversation about what this design process is now for a show that is coming up in October. And I just want to say thank you for joining me tonight. And I'm excited to pretty much get out of the way and listen to you all talk about what the early process is like, where you're going with these shows, and again, thanks so much. And Seema, I'm going to pass it over to you.
Sure, thanks so much, Tom. And let me actually just begin by saying thank you. Truly, thank you. I love this WPA initiative, and you are indeed putting artists to work, which of course is the syndemic that we've been living through, not just a pandemic, but several pandemics together, has been a really difficult one. And so to create as artists, to give us that opportunity and to give us an opportunity to hopefully bring something beautiful and inspiring and creative to your community is a real gift. And I'm very grateful and deeply nervous. This will be my first back in person production. You know, I've been living in the land of directing on podcast and online. And so next week, Monday, walking into a rehearsal room for the first time since last March is, I think, going to be both thrilling and terrifying. And I imagine it'll also feel like home. Yeah.
You know, home is a big theme as we're winding through what this next year, sort of welcoming people back home, the home of the theater. Seema, you and I met a number of years ago. I think it was at a conference at that time. I think you were living in California, as was I. And since then, you've been the deputy artistic director at Arena Stage. You're now on a very exciting new path in your career. We're really thrilled to have you here directing these two shows. Lynn, you have worked at Virginia Stage Company several times, and it's great to have you coming back to the Wells. You're coming back, though, in a very new way, in that we just completely updated the fly loft and the dimmers, and it's going to be a very new experience for you as a lighting designer coming into a space that has taken advantage of being shut down for the pandemic to do some renovations. And then Alan, you have been in Norfolk. Actually, I just learned at the opera, but not here at Virginia Stage Company. So it's exciting to welcome you in. So you were designing at the opera in 1983. So tell me a little bit of.
Actually, I was painting. I was not designing.
Okay. So tell me how. So Seema, so tell me how you and Alan connected on this, and just start talking a little bit about what is the early process of a director and designers talking about a show like these.
Sure. Well, I've known of Alan's amazing talent for a number of years. We got a chance to meet in person in DC. I think at Arena Stage, you generously stopped by when you were in town working on another project, and had been looking for an opportunity for us to work together for a long time. And when this came up, Tom, it's a true gift to be able to work with Alan. So thank you for giving that opportunity for us. And then Lynn and I met through you, Tom, and through this process. And it's always so great to be able to work with a designer, particularly lighting designer, who knows the space really well. Because it'll be my first time in the Wells, and there's always something exhilaratingly scary about that first time in a new space. So thanks for bringing both these designers, as well as Jenny Schaefer, who's our costume designer, and Andre Plus, who is our sound designer, who I've worked with I've known since grad school. So it's a dream team of designers. As you mentioned, we are in the very early stages of this process. And it's a new process for me because it's my first time directing in rep. So, where we'll have Hold These Truths,
right,
and Dear Jack, Dear Louise on the same stage with the same design team. And part of our process will be to figure out how these two shows speak to each other. Dramaturgically, they naturally do, since they're both set in, or the stories begin in the same time period, World War II. And yet the stories are so different versions of the American experience during that era. But there's some interesting dramaturgical similarities, like May 13, 1942 is when Gordon Hirabayashi writes his letter to the FBI saying he is going to protest the curfew and not obey. June 1st, 1942, so just a couple weeks later, is Jack's first letter to Louise. And so there's a lovely symmetry between these two scripts as well. Yesterday, Alan, Lynn, and I were on a Zoom, and I just sort of raised that, like, for folks who do see both plays, it would be great if subconsciously, or maybe even consciously, they have that moment of aha, like, oh, wow. And maybe there's something in our design that that allows these pieces to sort of be reflections of one another. What that is, we'll still see. We're yet to see. But the process often begins with research. And I know Alan has done a lot of visual research. And I'm going to put Alan on the spot. I don't know if you've got your Dropbox up and
I have my files ready, actually.
Oh, great.
Before you jump in there, let me just real quick, for folks who don't know both plays. So Dear Jack, Dear Louise, Ken Ludwig's play really about his parents, right? This is a story of how his parents met. Jack in the Dear Jack, Dear Louise is an Army captain, doctor. Louise is an aspiring actress in New York, and they have this romance over letters over the course of several years, right? So this is a love story that's based on the story of his parents. Hold These Truths, as you mentioned, starts with Gordon Hirabayashi's letter to the FBI saying he won't obey the curfew, and becomes the case of not going to internment camps goes all the way to the Supreme Court. Mm-hmm. So just so folks know, these are the two plays. And now, Alan, go ahead and take it away in terms of some research.
we're just taking it from SEMA. It is an interesting challenge to take two plays that were not written, obviously, to be played together necessarily, but to come up with some type of a visual, some sort of metaphor that ties the two. And both of them are uh, emotional journeys. In both cases, they're physical too, actually. Well, in the case of Jack and in Gordon, they actually are, there's a lot of physical traveling involved in their lives. So, trying to get some sort of metaphor with that, I mean, something to tie it in. And also it's interesting that both plays are not traditional in the sense that, well, the first one, that you have two characters who are talking to each other, but not. And that we're observing that, the audience is observing that as a third person. Gordon's case in Hold These Truths, actually, Seema, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the audience is actually is viewing it as in second person, correct?
Yep.
And
Yep.
it's actually talking to them.
Yeah, that's
So
correct.
there's that. There's a thing we talk about in theater or in film called the fourth wall, where we're actually breaking that wall.
Mm-hmm.
And to some degree, maybe it's worth exploring to break the wall in the first play as well, in Dear Jack, Dear Louise, because it's different than your normal narrative play, in that you see, as you observe as a passive observer. In both of these plays, you almost become something of a participant.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
That being said, on a very high conceptual level, the first thing I do as a designer, obviously, is we break down the scripts. We break up the beats and we see different things. And then there's in the Dear Jack, Dear Louise, they mentioned very specific locations. At least from their letters, this is what they're talking about. So that's kind of where I started with it. And the first was, let me see if I can share. What I did was break it up into 5 sections. There's the Louise's boarding house that she moves into. What I think is her neighborhood growing up in Brooklyn. The Coatesville, which is the town that Jack grew up in, and it happens to in fact be that the plant that he works at is actually the big thing in Cokesville, Pennsylvania. And then ultimately in Medford, Oregon, where he's then stationed. And then finally, what I think a lot of people will recognize, these are pictures from Times Square in 1945 on the armistice. So let me see if I could do this. Is this working?
Sure. Not there. We go.
Here we go. Here we are. Mm-hmm. So these were just, I do what we all do. We kind of start with Google. Start going through images. And these are of that time, 1940s boarding houses. There was a lot of, this way. These are not uncommon.
Right.
I was actually telling Seema, the apartment I live in New York, I live on 34th Street on the west side. Across the street is actually, I think it's one of the last single women's apartment buildings in New York. It was built by the president of Macy's, the department store, which is about 4 blocks away. He built it as a boarding house for his female employees. They came to New York, and the building dates from the 20s. It still has a kitchen in the basement, so they probably still offer a board service if you want a food service, but it's specifically designed for single women. So these type of things, they still exist in our culture. So it's a general sense of that. And then I wanted this, she doesn't specifically say what neighborhood in Brooklyn, but I was going to take a guess as Bay Ridge, which was a very Irish working class Italian neighborhood. It was a suburb of New York. People commuted there. It used to be separate, but then when the subways came in the early century, early in the 20th century, you know, became a respectable suburb. It still is, and it's still pretty. It still has a pretty strong Irish influence. Yeah. And you see the kind of neighborhood that's there. There's a particular kind of architecture that they're looking at.
Mhm.
As I say, this is almost like just it's like due diligence work in a funny way. You want to get at least a sense of what they're talking about when they make a reference to something. This is Pennsylvania. This is Coatesville, Pennsylvania. This is the Lucan Steel Mill, which he was referred to. There's not much research on Coatesville, other than it's clearly a factory town.
Mm-hmm.
And I found these postcards kind of intriguing, so I was just looking at those for a while. The other is, he doesn't make a specific reference, but there is a, Jack talks about a Army base outside of Medford, Oregon. And from what I can tell, I believe it's Camp White is the name of it. So these are actual, from what I can find, photos of it. It was an Army camp, and there was actually a medical installation there.
Mm-hmm.
What we do with these, it's hard to say. You know, it's really just a baseline. When he talks about this, we get at least a sense. Oh, okay, this is what he's talking about. What do we represent it physically or in any way initially? Who knows? You know, we really don't know. And this last, I think a lot of you are familiar with this. This is the VJ Day in 1945.
Yeah, the things I really love about the research, Alan, is particularly in thinking about these two plays together, I'm looking really at the materials, the textures, to think about connective tissue in that sort of way. And it's just so great to get a peek into the past with this research. I'm curious.
It was interesting use. Oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Oh, no, you go ahead.
Particularly these, this one, you know, obviously it, you know, these are three people that were over. If we go to both the plays, we spend the evening with three people. But there was obviously this whole other thing that was going on outside of these three people's lives, which is kind of interesting. And you sort of see that in this crowd photo, for example. You know, there's a greater story that's going on.
Yeah, there's our, it's as if being plucked out of the crowd, right?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, each one of these people have their own story that happened in the same period that these plays happened.
Yeah. I'm curious, Lynn, you know, as you look through the research images and with your lighting designer brain on, what are the things that you pay most attention to?
I guess working with the environments that they're in as they're talking or where they are, you know, the difference of being in a boarding house room with your roommate or in a dressing room. Lighting is probably much kinder to Louise than Jack on base, something that's more utilitarian. And then other times we have the indication of battle going on. There's just this very different atmospheres, trying to support things like that. And with Gordon, he tells us a lot about where he travels, where he is, what the conditions are. So trying to get the feeling of that through the lighting to help support that, I think is something that's going to be really useful and show the differences in all three of these people's situations, because they're all going through World War II, but in very different aspects at the time.
Yeah, yesterday you talked about uplighting at one point.
Yeah.
Could you talk a little bit about that again?
Yeah, there's a few times where something atmospheric might be help, indicate what's going on. Gordon, when he's out hitchhiking, talks about stopping and reading. If it's not windy, he can have a candle and read in the moonlight while he camps overnight. And I thought, well, this might be kind of nice to have something low level up, as if he's got a candle nearby, that we can make it very intimate, get that feeling of outside in the big world by yourself. And also times with, there's a couple times during Jack and Louise, Dear Jack, Dear Louise, that it might get that sense of you're standing on the abyss, maybe for Gordon at times, looking over a cliff. And just trying to pull in and manipulate, I guess, the focus and how intimate a time. Things get pretty serious from time with Jack and Louise, and other times there's a lot of humor that I really enjoy, and I guess different angles that way will help convey what's going on with them. Does that help at all? I was
That
talking
is
about
great. I love
maybe
that.
using some texture here and there to help, where we are, and making things more moody, lighter moments, whatever I can do to help with that kind of atmosphere and to help the story.
Yeah. I love that you brought up lighter moments, because both of these plays do have comedy in them, they're real lives, and which means they're moments of tremendous joy, moments of tremendous pain as well, just as I think we all experience in our lives. I'd like to also share a few things, if I could, since Tom, you had asked, what do we do at this early phase? So I think all of us do some sort of breakdown of some version. And so these are like I try to read through the script and just break it down into chunks and beats of what happens. When are my transitions? When are the bigger transitions? When is there an intermission? What are the things I need to really make note of for props or sound that I need to make sure I don't forget? What are the things I need to make sure I research, or movies that are referenced that I need to watch again? So that's my geeky spreadsheet for Dear Jack, Dear Louise, and then my geeky spreadsheet for all these truths as well.
That is fantastic. And I know that there are a whole lot of folks who are like the props people and sound people are like, yeah.
It just helps me think through it. And this is actually what helped me really recognize the symmetry in the letters, between the two plays, just breaking it down like that. And then image-wise, I always say the designer's research will always be so far better than the director's research on this. But so I tried to go in a different direction and was, again, just thinking about material. And, in my mind, when I think of World War II, I think of tents, I think of parachutes, rightly or wrongly. And so and this kind of material. So I spent some time just Googling parachutes and found this image. And what I loved about it is the way light goes through it, which made me think of Lynn. It made the geometry of it, geometric shapes, the architecture of it made me think there might be flexibility and potential. This might be the one and only time we look at a parachute in our process, or maybe this is the seed of something that becomes something. But I part of that, the early process is to look at things and not censor ourselves at this time, because we'll have plenty of time to fire ideas in the coming weeks, but now is the time of gathering ideas. I just also started thinking about USO shows. Louise doesn't perform in a USO show. She doesn't go on tour, but she does perform or work at the Stage Door Canteen, and she is a performer. And so that got me thinking about these USO shows and what does a USO stage look like? And does that offer us any sort of scenic idea? Again, here's, this sort of tent-like material, pipe and drape. Oh, this is, Gypsy Rose Lee at the Stage Door Canteen. Oops, here we go. More about the Stage Door Canteen here. A USO club dance, more USO shows, USO women on tour, more stage. So, random things like that have been what I've been looking at. And then for Hold These Truths, Quakerism is such a big part of Gordon's life.
Right.
And so starting to look at just Quaker buildings and again, the materials. And as I think of materials, there's a connectivity between the simplicity of a Quaker building and the simplicity of a barrack, though very different aesthetics. There is a simplicity that they share. They share wood, as opposed to steel, right? And so been looking at these images as well. A Quaker, I just looked at gardens and fields. This image came up when I Googled Quaker gardens, and then Gordon lives in the state of Washington, and he makes a reference to Hooverville during the Great Depression. He went to University of Washington. He would have enrolled in 1937. So, the internet is a fabulous thing. You can find yearbooks and all sorts of things online. So this, I just tried to pull up a yearbook. He makes a reference to this particular hall where he socializes. So again, just looking at these things, I believe it, like for me, it almost becomes an act of willful serendipity and hoping, or just trying to keep eyes, ears, all senses available and seeing what crosses and what might naturally pop. And then asking the collaborators, what is popping for you? What are those impulses? Because they're there for a reason. And what happens if we follow some of those impulses? What do we discover along the way?
That's really cool. It's typically first rehearsal, there'll be some kind of a presentation from the designers and from the director. But it's, this is the beginning of the process, not a point where we're ready to roll, and that we're months out here. So it's really, I'm very interested to see where this develops and to see how does the parachute come back, or is it that one time that we saw it?
Right.
And will things like, as I'm looking at those images, I'll say that all those images of crowds, there's a both of a longing and a kind of spike of fear, I guess, from the COVID world we're living in.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm interested to see how that plays out over the course of this thing. Both of these shows were plays that we were exploring because small casts were able to produce this and in fact it was costume designer Jenny Schaefer whose idea was to put these plays together. We were looking at these two plays independently, and the idea of as we were looking at how do we pair this? So this was something that and as soon as she mentioned it, I was like, yeah, of course, and how great it is to have a director who can put them together in a way that I think that I've done one rep show before, but it was two halves of Nicholas Nickleby, right? So and in terms of seeing reps, I've seen plenty of reps done that were done by two different teams, maybe a single set designer. But I'm really interested to see how this develops with a single team looking at these two pieces as a kind of a whole, when of course they're two different plays. So
yeah, and I thank you for that artistic challenge. Like people will often ask, like, what's your dream show? What do you want to direct? And it's often, you know, I want to direct the show I don't know yet. And I want to direct the thing that challenges me and gives me an opportunity to grow as an artist. And Tom, you've given me this opportunity to work on both these plays and to work on them in rep. I'm really excited to do that. And also going back to the parachute, I wonder if there is like a land of fired ideas. You know, I never do this, but I feel like, oh, maybe I should go back to like for like the shows of the last 5 years I've directed and try to pull up all that old early research and
The stuff that ends up on the sort of the cutting room floor. And
yes. Where do those fired ideas go? Sometimes they end up in a different play down the road. Maybe.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, look, I don't know. So Maris, question for Seema, how do you approach two different genres with two different viewpoints of, and then because I don't have my keyboard,
of America.
Yeah. The rest of that.
Yeah, I can see that. Yeah. How do you approach two different genres with two different viewpoints of America? What a smart question.
Mhm.
In some ways, the genres of these two plays actually they don't feel so different to me. And please, others, tell me if I'm being an idiot about that. They're both stories, right? They're told primarily through these words and these experiences of these characters. They're character-focused stories. About two different viewpoints of America, I actually think they share a viewpoint, which is a love for this country.
Mm-hmm.
Gordon loves the United States. He loves the Constitution.
Mm-hmm.
He has a moment of deep loss and grief and betrayal when the case is lost. But then there's the redemption of the love when that verdict is overturned decades later.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and you know, Jack and Louise, they build this affection for one another, and then of course, you know, there's a turning point where one of them signs love, right, for the first time, and you know, that's a big deal to write those words down, right? So they fall in love, not ever having seen each other. They experience betrayal of one another as well through those letters, and then a reunion and reunification of that love in the end when they finally meet in person. So in some ways they're both love stories,
Right.
And they both share a love of this nation. What's different is the realities of their experiences because of what was open to these individuals at that time. You know, as he is third generation Japanese American. Is he third or second generation? Second generation, thanks. And there was no, you know, he had no choice. I mean, he had a choice and he chose to defy it, but the executive order came down to incarcerate Japanese American citizens. And so that's what was available to him at that time, the choice to comply or defy. Jack had different choices available to him at that time, the choice to become a doctor in the Army and serve. And Louise had different choices that were available to her to be able to pursue her career as an actor on Broadway. And so I think when we think about that, like, it's not that these characters have different viewpoints of America. It's America in that time had different opportunities and things to offer them, just as it does now.
Just as it does now.
But they also had, all three of them had the common frustration of dealing with war and their lives being interrupted.
Exactly.
To different degrees, but everything had to be stopped. Everything stopped.
Yeah. Yeah. I shared with Tom, I think it would be fun when the shows are in rep for the actors of one show to lead a post-show discussion of the other show, and vice versa. Because they'll be, in living the characters night after night, they'll then experience the other show in a way differently than I will, or you will, or anybody else. So that would be very fun to hear them do that.
Well, and I love what you say. They're stories, we're storytellers, and they're not. It's not a, they're not two plays that are. One is an absurdist, non-narrative piece. They have different approaches to narrative, but they're actually in some ways more similar, stylistically than different. Yeah, beautiful.
Yeah.
So
I do think I have one last thing I was going to say. Oh, go ahead, Alan. Were you going to say something?
No, I was just going to adding to what you mentioned, something that I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe they're all about the same age.
Yes.
So they went through this experience at the same age, in their late 20s or mid 20s, I guess it would be, right? So it's at that point in their life when they have they kind of left home.
Yeah.
Like all of them have left home for the first time. And they're sort of experiencing their first taste of adulthood to then be handed these situations.
Yeah, what a great point. What a great point, Alan.
And it makes, it made me think, I was like, what was I thinking when I was 24? I mean, it makes you think about it. What choice did I have? What things, and I think it's at that age, it's all sorts of things start, all sorts of emotional maturing process happens. And it often is like a trial by fire at that age.
Yes. Yeah. Beautiful point. I have one last thing I wanted to share, and I'm going to share it, but I guess I really am wanting to make it a question for everyone in the Zoom and anybody who watches this at some point later. As a director, when beginning to direct a play, the question I always ask myself is, why is this story, why is this show, why is this play necessary today?
Right.
And it's interesting to now ask that question about these two plays in rep, because I'm broadening that question. Why is this rep of these two shows necessary today? And where I am at, and what I'd love to hear from others is where they're at on this. But I feel we're living in such a polarized nation, and which means that we often, and maybe I should just say I often, only know my experience, but I don't know the experience of somebody who looks very different from me, has had a different educational background than me, a different family upbringing than me, and so I just know what is my truth. And I think just again, seeing that how polarized we are, I think if we're all just living in our own personal truths, we miss out. And again, I'll say I miss out on the bigger picture, on what else is going on. And so why is this rep necessary today? It gives us that opportunity to look at this moment in the past and see this beautiful complexity, painful at times, but delicious and delightful at other times, of what makes our country our country. And that it fills my heart with love and with joy, actually, to be able to widen the lens and to see more. And it makes me think, okay, so today for myself, I want to widen the lens and see and experience people and their lives that I have nothing in common with. I've never been to Norfolk. I am looking forward to it. I hope I meet people who on face value I seem to have nothing in common with, and that I can get into interesting conversations and maybe discover that we share something. So I guess that's what for me is like why this rep is necessary today. But I'd really love to hear others' thoughts on this.
Look, I think we will hold on to that as a touchstone to come back to. So this is a long conversation, right? It's
Yes.
May. We're gonna see this full production in October. So I think that question's been posed, audience, of why is this necessary? It's something that's it's a question I ask. We all ask here as we're putting seasons together, as we are putting teams together. And I would love to hear from the audience how they feel about exactly this question and how this develops over the course of these 5 or 6 months. So I deeply appreciate Seema, Alan, Len. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. Thank you, audience who has come, and for the folks who are going to see us we'll have this posted on our website. So we'll be sending it out as well. So thanks so much, folks, for joining us for this edition of Wellsness WPA Wednesday. Thanks.
Thank you. Take care,
Thank you.
everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Right.